So welcome everyone to this History Week event. What is a history degree good for? And I want to just quickly begin by acknowledging country. I'm in Armidale on land that was, is and always will be Aboriginal. This place is part of the country of the Anawan people, and I want to acknowledge their elders past and present, and also the elders of the Gumbayinga, the Dunghutti and the Kamilaroi people who share the custodianship of this land. All of Australia is unceded Aboriginal land. So tonight's event is a panel discussion which has evolved in response to the recent proposal to dramatically increase the cost of humanities degrees at Australian universities, and it's being debated in the Senate right now, or in the House of Representatives right now. I think I can speak for everyone when I say we're pretty certain history degrees are valuable. But to unpack this more, we have three speakers representing different perspectives on the value of a history degree: a student, a recent graduate, and an employer. We've got a pretty tight schedule, so I'll ask you to hold your questions until all three of our panel have spoken. And to introduce them and frame the discussion, we have Dr. Nancy Chung, who's an Associate Professor in Australian History in the School of Humanities and Social Science at the University of Newcastle. Her primary research area is Australian environmental history, in particular human and animal relations, with a secondary interest in the history of Newcastle. Nancy.
Thanks a lot, Matt, and welcome everybody. So the concept for this session started out of the announcement last June by the Federal Education Minister Dan Tehan of his government's intention to vary the cost of university courses. So under the Higher Education Support Amendment, Job Ready Graduates and Supporting Regional and Remote Students Bill, students would pay less than they do now for courses deemed by the government to lead to skills needed in the future economy, such as nursing, agriculture, and mathematics, and much more to study in other areas, from commerce to law to hospitality. So those interested in history were a bit shocked to see that our discipline would face one of the greatest price rises, 113% more, rising from under $7,000 for a course to $14,500. A measure which would leave history majors with very large HECS debts, which would erode future earnings for decades. So this rising cost was concerning, but more disturbing was the messaging that seemed to underlie it, the apparent value judgment saying that history is an area of study that people should be guided away from by this price signal, and that the reason was because it didn't produce a skill set which would be in demand in future workplaces. So although there are many reasons to study history, we could always all come up with a lot, we've chosen tonight to focus on those that are related to what's called now employability. So to inform these discussions, like good historians, we of course turn to the evidence. So post-graduation surveys like the Future of Work for Australian Graduates, produced by the Australian Institute Centre for Future Work, show that after 4 months, humanities graduates have the same rates of full-time employment as those with the more favoured science degrees. The Department of Education, Skills and Employment's latest Australian Graduate Outcomes Survey found that after 3 years, humanities grads were employed at higher rates than those from a number of STEM disciplines. Employers groups have spoken up in favour of the value of interdisciplinary teams in which humanities graduates play important roles because of their capacity for communication, creativity, adaptation, and critical thinking. Our own Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, in her speech at the Premier's History Awards ceremony last Friday, emphasised historians' research skills, objectivity, fairness, and capacity for engagement, all very useful workplace skills. So Dan Tehan's proposal may or may not be approved. It's currently the subject of a Senate inquiry, but it certainly provided a good opportunity to discuss the value of studying history. And with this in mind, we invited our three speakers tonight to talk about what they see as the value of degrees in history. And they adopt three different perspectives: a recent honours grad, a PhD now working in the field, and an organisational change leader who's worked with humanities graduates through a long career. So I really look forward to hearing what they have to say tonight.
Thanks, Nancy. So first up then we have Molly Northcote, who's a PhD candidate at UNE, currently working on early modern witchcraft trials in England and New England. The other New England, I assume. She has lived in Armidale and attended UNE since 2014, where she completed her Bachelor of Historical Inquiry and Practice with honours, which she received the University Medal. Thanks, Molly.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. And thank you, Nancy. I'm really honoured to be a part of this. Look, I've been thinking a lot about value and what my history degree means for me. I think it's important to just come out and say for the majority of my life, right up until the HSC, I wanted to be a vet. I was very passionate about animals and I thought that was where I was going to go. However, my Band 6 in Advanced English, Modern History, Ancient History and Extension History led me down a different path. And I think the value of choosing a history degree is not just the medium for which we work in. So my niche field is witchcraft and the Salem witch trials in particular, which is what I wrote my honours thesis on. However, these are just the mediums for which encompass really transferable and essential skills to any workforce. And Nancy, you mentioned a few: critical thinking, source identification and analysis, reading and writing to a high level, and also data retrieval and collection, just to name a few. So having this history degree as well and working here at UNE for 6 years has really built my confidence within myself with my reading, writing, and my speaking abilities. And I'm incredibly honored to be able to study humanity, which I think is so incredibly important. And I think it was Mark Twain who said that history does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And for the government to, I think, make my studies seem not job relevant is really disheartening for the amount of real life skills that I've learned, not just about humanity, but about other skills like reading and writing and critical thinking, which is applicable to all disciplines. And I'm pretty sure Robin Williams in the Dead Poets Society summed it up the best when he said, he was talking about arts and poetry in general, but I think it could be more broadly applicable to history when he said, we don't read poetry because it's cute. We read it and write poetry because we are members of the human race, and the human race is filled with passion. Medicine, law, business, engineering are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, and love, these are what we stay alive for. And I think that probably sums up, when I read that, it really summed up the value of my degree and why I chose history and why I stick with it. So thank you.
Great, Molly, thank you so much. And next up we have Hone Cuff, who holds a PhD in history from the University of Newcastle, where she researched trade, diplomacy and defence and the manner in which each of these aspects of the national interest intersect and shape one another. Her work can be found in History Australia, the Australian Journal of Politics and History and The Conversation. She's currently a historical research officer at the Sea Power Centre, Australian Department of Defence. In this role, she contributes to the preservation and development and promotion of Australian naval history. Hone has previously worked at the University of Newcastle and the Australian National University. Both in and outside of work, she is passionate about community building and historically informed policy making. Hone.
Unmute myself. Thank you so much, Matt. And I'm want to echo Molly's sort of thanks as well at being so honoured to have been invited to join this panel tonight, and I'll say welcome to our online audience. Technology can be a really wonderful and beautiful thing, and I think I'm so pleased that tonight we're able to sit here virtually and meet and have these really wonderful conversations and share our experiences. It warms my heart. So I began my formal history study way back in 2012 with a Bachelor of Arts, majoring in history and politics and international relations at the University of Newcastle. And I went on and completed my PhD there as well. And in these years of studying history, two things became really clear to me, and that was that I was drawn to complex problems, to picking them apart and understanding how they worked. And the second thing that became clear to me was that I wanted to communicate how these things feed into bigger contemporary pictures and into the weighty decisions that I see being made in Parliament or in business. And studying history, I think, has really allowed me to do these two things. I've been incredibly fortunate to have landed in the role that I'm currently in at the Sea Power Centre within the Department of Defence. The Sea Power Centre seeks to preserve and promote Australia's naval history and develop maritime concepts to assess informed decision making about policy and force structure and organisation and capabilities, things that I find really interesting and really important. And in the history section, the focus is very much on communicating to RAN personnel, both past and present, to the Department of Defence and to the public why service counts, why this history of Australia's Navy counts, how it fits into the bigger narrative of Australian diplomacy and industry and capabilities. So of course you can see how this role really speaks to those two driving interests that became apparent during my years of university. So I consider myself incredibly lucky in that sense. So as Molly mentioned, these critical and meaningful approaches to evidence, qualitative and quantitative data analysis, abstract thinking, these are all skills that we develop while studying history, and in particular that I developed whilst undertaking independent research in my PhD. And I think they really are very transferable to my current role in the public service, where I need to think really critically and creatively, where I need to find answers to tricky questions through close engagement with sources and with data, and where, most importantly, I think I need to be able to communicate to my peers and to the public I serve this data. And to finish on a personal note, my PhD in history has honestly been the single greatest thing I have ever done for myself in my short life. It's the nature of that kind of research, of sitting with ideas, of seeking out the sources that help me understand, defend and refute these ideas, and then eventually getting to a place where I'm comfortable enough to articulate and sort of defend my concept. This has all absolutely contributed to my sense of my self-confidence across a variety of settings in ways I cannot articulate. And as a public servant, I'm of course really cognizant of not sort of speaking in an official capacity this evening on proposed federal policy, but what I do want to say is that it saddens me to think that I might have missed out on developing these personal and professional skills had the option of studying history just been simply unaffordable. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much, Hannah. And finally, we have a slightly different perspective from Clancey, who's an organisational change leader with over 25 years experience delivering business transformation in a range of industries. She's worked across Dublin, Auckland, Wellington and Sydney, and has experience in industries including federal and state government, banking, insurance, manufacturing and health, operating both as a management consultant for the PricewaterhouseCoopers and IBM, as well as consulting independently.
Thanks, Matt. And same as Molly and our other speaker, Hannah, just like to say thank you guys for inviting me here today. It's a privilege to be here. And I think it's also been a privilege to actually think about what my arts degree has meant to me. Because obviously when you're asked to do something like this, it does get you to reflect, and it does get you to think back on what is turning out to be a very long career. So thanks for the opportunity to share that today. I suppose what I'm going to talk to is my personal experience, but just listening to Nancy talking at the start, and then also the other speakers, it's interesting to see how my personal experience aligns with the evidence, Nancy, that you talked to at the start about the value of arts degrees and history degrees, and then also the skills that both the other speakers talked to are exactly the same skills that I'm going to talk to today. And we didn't prep that in advance. We haven't chatted before, so it's interesting to see that come to the fore straight away. So I suppose the perspective I'd like to come from is that I've been in the workforce now with an arts degree for about 28 years. I'm ashamed to say it's not history, but it is arts, so you know it's close. But plenty of my friends and colleagues went through arts degrees with me. In the 28 years that I've been working, there has been a continuous theme, and it's getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And that is the theme that our workforce is changing, our environment is changing, the context in which we're working is changing. And the thread that I suppose, live with and work with is that theme of continuous change changes the skills that we need. And increasingly, as you look at the research that's done about the world we live in, the skills that are required become more and more generalist skills as opposed to specialist skills. And I suppose that's the kind of theme that I landed on when I thought about my own arts degree and my own work experience. So I'm just going to reference a couple of things that I'm familiar with, but I'm sure lots of you have got plenty of things you've read as well that may either challenge or align with what I've come across. One of the things that I've often referred to is a study, an annual CEO study that PricewaterhouseCoopers does. It's familiar to me because I did spend some time working in PricewaterhouseCoopers, but it's not a plug for them because lots of the consulting firms do this. They interview the CEOs and the leading business people on a regular basis, and they basically say, what are you thinking about? Where are your concerns? What are the trends you're seeing? And what should the broader world be aware of? The PwC survey has been running for about 23 years now. And the one that's just come out in 2020 talked to 1,500 CEOs across the world. And the theme, not surprisingly, this year is navigating the tide of uncertainty. So when they talk to the CEOs across the world, what's the central theme that comes out from those discussions? It's about navigating uncertainty. And what's interesting to me when I look at that is the theme for the last 23 years has all been about change. And it's been about the speed of change, and it's about the volume of change. And then it's also about what are the skills that we need to navigate this environment that we're in. So that particular study this year, the 2020 study, found that 78% of the CEOs interviewed were concerned about the availability of skills. And the skills that they talked about that they're concerned about are the transferable skills that I think we've all just referenced. They're the creativity, they're problem solving, and they're the ability to navigate a world with lots of digital technology. So it's that transferable skill set that's coming consistently to the fore in the world of work. So then when I look at the graduates that I work with, the students that come into our businesses and the teams that I build, and when I think about what's the value of a degree, I see a couple of different things, and I might have different language, but I think we're all talking the same thing. But one of the things that I see most strongly come to the fore is that when someone has a degree, a broad degree, they come to a discussion with confidence. They come to a discussion with a willingness to participate, a willingness to have an opinion, and a willingness to contribute. And what I find is there's less concern about whether you're technically right or not. There's less concern about the 1%. There's more willingness and confidence to engage when we have people in our teams and in our businesses with broad degrees. So that's one of the big pluses that I see. Another key skill that I think both our previous speakers have talked to, but possibly with different language, is the ability to do analysis and to do research and then come up with a proposition or a proposal, or to have an argument and build a case for something, is a really core skill in a world that's continuously changing. And I think that skill has evolved over the course of my career. So it's less about what you know, it's more now about, can you go and research, can you do the analysis, and can you build a case? And again, I find that skill is one we find in graduates and in people with broad degrees. The third thing that I value and that I often see and even seek out is team members or individuals who will come with a broad perspective. And this also talks to that changing world that we are working in. So profit is no longer enough. And even though I exist in the big bad world of corporates, where profit was king for a very long time, you can now see from the front of our papers almost every single day and consistently over months and over weeks, profit alone is not what makes a good company. There are such a broad range of stakeholders now. There's the social license that companies need to operate. There's community expectations that have changed, that we need our workforces to have really broad perspectives and to be able to see things from a a customer perspective, see it from a stakeholder perspective, see it from a board perspective, not just see things either from a financial or from a technical perspective. And they're probably the three key things that I consistently see when I engage with people who have broad-based degrees. And what I've tended to do over the course of my career is I've come into organizations and I've been helping to drive a program of change. And it's often about bringing those people with the confidence to have a voice and have an opinion and the confidence in their broad perspective, and bringing them into multidisciplinary teams with actuaries, with engineers, with lawyers, and actually creating and solving problems together. And that's where we drive change from. And those, to think that those degrees will somehow in the future be less valued and therefore there will be less of those people available really worries me when you put it in the context of an increasingly complex, changing world. So they're probably two of the perspectives that I was keen to share today. I don't want to hog too much of the time. So I might just pause there and maybe hand back to you, Matt, and then you might want to open for questions, I think.
Thanks, Emma, and thanks to all of our speakers. Great introduction, I guess, to this topic from some different perspectives. So maybe I'll just throw it open to the panel. I mean, does anyone have any immediate reactions to what we've been talking about or thoughts they want to offer?
I might jump in. Oh, you go.
No.
Basically simultaneous, but Molly, then Hane.
That's okay. Just it's who can unmute themselves the fastest, I suppose.
That's right. Good draw.
No, I just wanted to jump in and say, as someone who is just started my PhD, worked for 6 years doing an undergraduate bachelor's and my honours degree, it's really honestly heartwarming to talk to someone who works in the field and an employer. Because I think, especially when I told my family that I no longer wanted to be a vet and I was going to follow my passion and do history, they were very disheartened. You know, I have families of doctors and things, and they said, you know, you'll never get a job, it's not employable, you won't get any money. And it's really nice to know that, as you said, Amir, like it's you know, it's more than profit these days, and we're actually looking for people with real transferable skills and personalities. And it's honestly really heartwarming to hear that as someone who is progressing through my PhD, hoping to get a job at the end of it. But you know, studying it, even without the prospect of any employment at the end is virtue enough, I think. But thank you.
Okay.
I think, Amy, I think I find it really interesting that you're talking about the changing skills we need being this trend, you know, for the last 20 years in these CEO kind of annuals. And I think even just reflecting on my time at university, the change that I noticed in the way that educators were talking about the arts degree. Sort of when I went in to my BA, there wasn't things like work integrated learning. We weren't doing tech and podcasts and thinking about, you know, big data and things like that, which having looked, you know, 8 years later, I definitely see that as being kind of core skills that have been built into the degree. And I applaud that because I really think it helps develop for students an idea about how their history skills can be kind of leveraged within the workplace, and being more kind of strategic about the courses that they pair with their history, thinking about, you know, how a career in journalism or law or cybersecurity would be benefited by an appreciation for fairness and causality and critical thinking. And so I think it's really, particularly as we're in this period of uncertainty, amplified by COVID and everything else, it's really fantastic to see events like this and conversations like this where we are, I think, responding to those need for changing skills.
Great reflection. And I think actually one of the things I was thinking as I was listening to all three of you was just something that I remember from my undergraduate study is the moment where I realized where I'd actually learned something in my degree, because it kind of like, you know, I went into an arts degree because I didn't know what I wanted to do at university, and I enjoyed it, and you know, but I never really felt like I'd learned anything. And then I remember going back and looking at an essay because I was writing something on a similar topic and thinking, oh my God, this is so bad. I've learned a lot at this university. They've been teaching me things all the time secretly. So that always strikes me as a memory that I have about my history degree. But maybe we'll throw it open now to anyone who has a question. I'm just trying to have a more general discussion here. So any thoughts from anyone for the panel or questions?
Hello.
Rosemary?
Yeah, hi. Based on what Nancy was saying with the transferable skills, I'm in a situation, I worked for just over 20 years in the criminal justice system, and then I did a career change into education. And I've been doing that for about 10 years. And over the last few years, I started studying at UNE, doing my diploma in local, family and applied history. And I'm now in a position, I've only got a few units left, and I'm considering my master's after this anyway. But just making a transition into some sort of history career is where I'm feeling a little bit stuck, because even though I come with a range of skills and knowledge and experience in other fields, I don't have a particular interest in anything. I didn't do history at school. It just became an interest over the last few years. So I'm sort of wondering what suggestions people might have in making transitions, and working full time and then also studying part time. It's difficult to get my foot in the door somewhere else as well, like for volunteering and things like that. So I just didn't know if anyone had any suggestions as to ways to start making that transition.
So I guess I've been thinking about this, and even in the people that we invited tonight and so on, that they're studying history with the aspiration of working as an historian, and then there's with the direction of going off into another area where those skills that you've developed are very useful and hopefully highly valued. So from what you've said, you're hoping to work as an historian?
I don't know. I enjoy research. That's probably the biggest part of it. Like I say, not so much a particular area of history, but I do enjoy that history, the research aspect of it probably the most.
So just in terms of jobs in history, the History Council also has had some very popular sessions on careers in history, which are available. They've been recorded, and you'll be able to find them on the website. So you might have a watch of those, and that is drawing upon people who are working as public historians and in the GLAM sector and so on as historians. So that might be a place to start. But I think you're quite right that often it does take making that personal connection, and so volunteering or finding where you can become a research assistant, and sort of picking up volunteer or small pieces of work, and then you become known, then you further develop your skills, and it might mature into something more.
Okay, thank you.
Would anybody else come in on that?
Mike, maybe?
Yeah, thank you very much to everyone for their insights and sharing, I guess, what they see as most valuable, and the clear things that come out are both, you know, the passion and the following of the interests and the transferable skills. And I don't think anyone goes into a humanities or a history degree to develop transferable skills. I might be wrong, but I'm certain that that's not what my experience was. And I guess I'm going to circle back, Rosemary. I think what I began to say is, I think the most important thing is to actually just follow that passion and follow that interest, and engage with it, as Nancy said, in all kinds of different settings. Certainly look up the Professional Historians Association, the PHA of New South Wales, and there's lots of interesting opportunities there, and public history and the Centre for Public History at UTS and various places. There's lots of internships, even in this day and age, and volunteer opportunities for that. But it is about following the passion, and I guess in the process developing those kind of skills that may land you somewhere that you never thought that you would be, whether it's in the history sort of field and discipline, or working for AIMER. But I guess I also wanted to just play devil's advocate here a little bit, and think maybe AIMER, first of all, so you've all focused on transferable skills, and you've said that many employers are aware of the need for those and desirous of those transferable skills, but are they as equally aware that those transferable skills can be gotten from humanities degrees? Or are they just wanting people with transferable skills and are not quite sure where they're coming from?
So I think increasingly there are references to the importance of the culture of organizations. So I think, and this has been the case for probably about 10 years, but increasingly so, the culture fit is as important as the skill when you're interviewing. And you'll have seen that play out through the Royal Commission reports all through last year. So much of the conversation there was about the culture of the organisation as well as the actions of the organisation, and some of the more harder pieces. And that PricewaterhouseCoopers survey, it also talks about the challenge of getting the right skills and the right culture fit. So I think increasingly employers are recruiting for fit. So it then becomes about, can you engage, can you participate, can you drive, can you collaborate? And I think it's not so much that employers are going to say, have you an arts degree or not, because I'm looking for someone with an arts degree. I think increasingly we're looking for the style and the behavior that's going to contribute to the organization. And then the skill set is secondary to some extent. And I think that also talks to obviously our environment is we have more of our population increasingly educated. So you do have the pick of graduates as an employer. So you can kind of focus less on the skills and more on the culture fit. And I don't just mean at graduate level, I mean all through the careers. So I think the way to think about it is what are the kind of characteristics that you bring? What's the passion you bring? Your drive? What's your capability to drive change? And my experience would be the people that would draw onto teams, you don't draw them on because of their background. Often I wouldn't have no idea what university degree someone has. I would just know that they're in meetings, they're contributing, and they want to drive a change. So therefore, there's someone that we want to have on the team, and we want to kind of help them grow and help them develop. Yeah, so that'd be kind of my perspective on it, and I think that's quite a consistent perspective when you talk to HR teams and when you talk to employers. So much of it now is about the culture fit and the characteristics that someone comes with, and then the skills are useful too.
So Emma, so you're talking about people that are already part of the organization and whether they're going to come into a particular work team?
Sometimes, but sometimes we're recruiting as well.
I guess that's a question I would have. You said you wouldn't even know what degree they had, but somebody at some point must be vetting.
Yes. Like that. So when you're recruiting internally into roles, you often, I mean, you can find out if you want to, but you often don't need to because you're interviewing the individual that's there. But obviously when you're recruiting in externally, you get a CV. But lots of the roles now, as you guys would know, in the university sector as well, can be contract roles. They can come in various different ways. They don't always follow your traditional career path where you advertise for a lawyer and you get a lawyer. You know, particularly with these kind of change programs, you're looking for characteristics rather than specifics. So we can end up with people with some quite interesting backgrounds, but you often discover that 6 months or 12 months in. Yeah. And I have had a couple of, probably 3 instances where people I've worked with quite extensively for a number of years, and then you learn that they left school in the end of year 9, but their ability to contribute has meant that their actual education has never been a factor. And in each of those cases, those three cases, all of them went back to do degrees later. And I got to see the value that they got from going through the degrees. And a big part of it was confidence. So they had the skills and the ability already. It was the confidence to have a voice that the degree gave them.
It's nice that Hannah and I have known each other for quite a long time, and I can vouch for the increasing confidence, Hannah, that, you know, when I first met you, you were quite a bashful, probably self-conscious person, and now, you know, you've just grown into a very confident young woman. So it's nice to see.
Thank you, Nancy. That's lovely.
Did any of our other audience members have a question or a comment or anything they'd like to contribute? It doesn't have to be a formal question if you don't want to.
I might throw a question out there while we're waiting, while people are thinking, which is one I was thinking about before this session began. But assuming that this change does go ahead and history degrees become substantially more expensive, how do you think that will actually affect them? So some people here, I do, teach into history degrees. Other people have studied history degrees. What do you think the effect will be if we make history degrees more expensive? And more broadly, how do you think it'll affect history and the practice of history in Australia?
Can I speak as a student?
Sure, please.
For this, as I said before, I've nearly finished my diploma this year or beginning of next year, and I was thinking of doing my Masters of History. And when all these changes are being proposed, from my perspective, I feel like I'm going to be delaying my studies a lot more because of the cost, if there are these major increases in the cost. So financially, I think that's going to be my biggest impact now of getting through my Masters. So it's been a bit of a deterrent. I still want to do it because I enjoy the study, but I feel like I'm going to probably go at a slower pace than what I probably would have done otherwise.
It's an interesting question as to how it affects the cost of postgraduate degrees. I haven't actually seen anything about that, whether there's a similar rise in the cost of courses at postgrad level or whether it's just undergrad.
Yeah, it's not clear to me.
But you might be insulated from it, Rosemary. Yeah.
I also work for part of the marketing team here at UNE, which is the future student team. So I get to have a lot of calls from prospective students, and it's been interesting hearing their calling up, and everyone's trying to desperately get into arts degrees in our last trimester 3 before the supposed price hikes, because I think it is going to affect postgraduate history degrees. I've heard it will affect Master of History and Master of Arts, as well as undergraduate degrees. But it's interesting. I think this carrot on the stick method of trying to lure people into STEM projects, I don't know. I'd like to have a little bit of hope that if people are still really passionate about history, then the fees won't deter them. I mean, I personally don't think about my HECS debt that much, and I try not to. But because I think if there's something you really want to do, I think that people will. I'm confident, and maybe I'm naive, but I think that people will still follow their passions, and I hope that it will bring a brand of more conscientious historians into the workforce because they really, really wanted to be there. Well, that's what I hope anyway.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well, Molly. This maybe it's just going to be, but it'll increase the students that are really interested in legacy and what it is to study humanity and what it is to think about the cause and causality and human history, rather than. And there's nothing wrong with not knowing what you want to do. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I picked history. I just knew I liked it. But maybe that's sort of a good silver lining from it if these things don't go ahead. But yeah.
That's kind of what I thought as well, that maybe it won't change the dynamics of the student. People will still do it, but they'll just be more in debt, which is really sad, frankly, because there's no
Yeah,
justification.
and I think that's the concern. And some of these submissions going into the Senate committee now are raising that. And there's been a study done on it, and it's saying that people that are paying these higher costs will look at having HECS debt that's paying off over 2 decades, so 20 years of repayments. And one of my postgrad students keeps a blog, and she wrote on this, and she was talking about even in education, if you decide to be a history teacher, you're going to have a bigger debt than someone who went through to be a science teacher. And that every step along the way, and you know, probably at the stage that Hone is at, and maybe Molly is contemplating to rent a better flat, to buy a house, to buy a car, to start a family potentially, is all going to be, there'll be a chilling effect that, well, I've got to get out from under this HECS debt first. I don't have the disposable income. And so you could really see a two-speed economy going on with people who've studied the humanities shouldering this debt and not being able to you know, become full adults that sort of follow the pathway that their parents might have done. So I think it's really worrying. And Matt, I think you've also talked about whether it will make history more of an elitist pursuit.
I do worry about that. I mean, I'm not sure that will happen immediately, but let's suppose that this is the thin end of the wedge, as it could be, and degrees only become more expensive over time. You know, I think I was saying to you two before we were organizing this, that I think even in my generation going through PhDs, more and more people come from middle class backgrounds than was the case in the 70s and 80s, when you really had some quite working class people going to university, studying history and doing PhDs and teaching me, you know, when I went through. And I'm not sure that's happening quite as much as it used to. And I just worry that will exacerbate that effect even more, which would be really sad.
Yeah, and look, if I can jump in as well, I do a fair bit of work with some disadvantaged high schools in Western Sydney, particularly, and you know, it's a real hard sell. You know, both, you know, to get them to think about to go to university in the first place, and then to get them to think about going to the University of Sydney, where, you know, they're not you know, I think in the arts faculty, when I started this program, we had 3.5% of our students in the arts faculty were from low SES backgrounds. 3.5%, and that was across the faculty. That wasn't even in the history department. And so it's, you know, they are facing some very tough decisions, and are already, it's difficult enough to kind of convince them that they should follow their passion, particularly when they're first in family and there's a lot of familial pressures to do something useful, and obviously useful. And that maybe raises the question too of, you know, should we be working harder to sell a humanities degree, you know, in a broader way, in the kind of way, you know, having someone like Amer speak up about the kind of the need, and having more people come out to speak in that respect. But I also wondered, Amer, I know you have 2 children like I do,
Yes.
who you know, university is looming. You know, do the changes make you think, what do I do?
Yeah, we've talked about it at home, and Matt, in answer to your question, I asked my daughter, who's 15, so she's heading into year 11. I said, what do you think about this idea that arts degrees might be dearer? And she probably has a slightly more natural science bent herself, but she could see it instantly. She went, "That's so unfair. How can you make one degree dearer than the other? Some people aren't going to be able to afford that, and if their passion is history, that's not fair." So I thought it was quite interesting that she could straight away see the inequity in it, that you're almost forcing the hand of the people who can't afford it. And she kind of went, I mean, I know I'll be okay, you'll pay for me, but what about all those other people? I don't know about that.
The other financial thing that's really interesting is that the universities are going to get more from teaching a history course than they are from teaching one of these courses for which the fees fall. And so there could be a perverse incentive to suddenly, maybe your marketing is going to say, really push the history, really push the, I don't know, communications. I think I have the letter here that our local member, Paul Fletcher, the Minister for Communications, Cyber Safety and the Arts, sent to my son, who is in this age bracket, telling him about this. And it's back from June. So he sent it out almost immediately when it was announced. And it's all rah-rah, isn't it great? Jobs in the future need tertiary qualifications. We're going to make it cheaper for people to study in the areas of the future. And then there's just this little paragraph: to deliver cheaper degrees in areas of expected employment growth, students who choose to study some of the more popular degrees will make a higher contribution. Student contribution to law and commerce will increase by 28%, and for the humanities, it will be 113%. So is an 18-year-old or a 17-year-old receiving that from your local member and setting it out as a fait accompli, not this is what we hope to do if we get it through the Senate, but this is happening, and sent out in June when people doing the HSC are making their decisions. You know, I think I was so furious when I saw this letter, honestly. Yeah, so he says around 60% of students are expected to see a reduction or no change in their student contribution.
So
They're tough for the rest of you.
Yeah. Mike, just to your point earlier about the challenges of selling when you're talking to people, there were a couple of things that I stumbled across that might be worth a look. So there's a book called Range that's been written by someone who was originally a sports journalist but has gone on to become a TED talker. So his name is David Epstein. And he's got some interesting perspectives on the risks associated with narrowing early. So he calls out the research that if you specialize early, you probably do get ahead early. But actually the longevity doesn't seem to be there in people's career, because they stagnate or they lose interest or they move off. Whereas the other side of the research is if you stay broad and actually if you wander for a little while, you have greater longevity in your career and you do catch up in terms of earnings, but it's just not so fast. And I do wonder, when you look at the language that the government is using in terms of job ready, I'm not convinced it's useful. We want people to be life ready, and we want them to be ready for their whole life, not just a job. And I think it's a little short-sighted is what it feels like. And I did think that talk that David Epstein gave was quite a nice counterbalance to some of that thinking. So we want people to be able to still be employed in 2040, 2060, 2080. And they're the graduates that are going to come in the next few years into universities. We have no idea what that world of work is like.
The government has no idea what job skills are going to be needed for those people either.
So to make people go narrow early for kind of short-term gain seems worrying. And I did think that book and that the speaker is quite accessible. So it's a nice counterbalance to that kind of very pragmatic, here's a good steady job. If you go down this path, in 3 years' time, you'll be employable. Yeah. So.
And I just, sorry, you go ahead, Molly.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think that it sits really unsettling with me to think that the government thinks of universities as job printing factories, because the university institution, I don't think was ever meant to be that. And it's really problematic for the government to just try and see it as a revenue for just printing more jobs. And I think that's really problematic. As I think you said, we want, I want to be life ready. I don't want to just do what the government tells me to do. I think there's more to life than that. So yeah, massively agree.
And I was only going to say that I went to university in Canada, and I think we just enrolled in an arts degree. We didn't have to declare a major. and we just explored in that first year of university. And it was really only in the second year or third year that you kind of decided to do more of one thing. And so it gave tremendous kind of license to explore and just to be open-minded. And I went in thinking I'll do history and politics and then become a lawyer, and ended up doing history and philosophy and marrying a lawyer. And I think that then I was disheartened when I got to Britain, and then and realized that they were making students choose before they got to university what degree they wanted to do. And then heartened when I got here to Australia, when I realized it's a little bit more like North America, but at least at the University of Sydney, we are now, requiring students to choose their degree earlier and earlier, and actually giving them a lot, in part, and this, I want to circle back on this idea of transferable skills, in part because the faculty at our university is so kind of bent on focusing on those transferable skills. The students are actually able to take fewer and fewer units of study in the subject that they love, and having to take more and more subjects in specifically transferable skill units. Some of it, I'm actually right in the middle of teaching one unit called interdisciplinary sort of skills, and I'm there as an interloper, there as a spy to see if it actually is working, because Hone, it's for students in their third or fourth year of university, and it is doing that kind of work of introducing them to collaborative work and to interdisciplinarity and to data mining. That's the reading this week and so I'm kind of interested to see how that works when it's a little bit divorced from the discipline that I've been focused on. But the effect that it is having is the faculty's focusing more on the transferable skills and less on the kind of the subject matter for the students. And is that going to matter? I mean, would that matter to you, Molly, and Hone? Would that matter to you as an employer, Amer, if we divorce the skills from the passion and the learning?
Yeah, I mean, I personally think so. I mean, as Matt said, I think one of the great things about going through the undergraduate was when you get to, I got to like my honors, like my second half of my honors year. And I thought like, oh my God, I'm learning things. I'm actually, and then I got the university medal, which was, and, it's like, I got pretty good at this. And I think getting this, and I never thought of myself like, oh yes, now I can critically think and I write really well. You did it through the medium of something that I really enjoyed. And I think if you divorce the medium from the skills, then it becomes really clinical, and you lose the passion for a discipline and for the passion of, learning about humanity. And so I think that's really important to keep those blended.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think blended is the perfect word to use. It's important to strike a balance between the two. I think I would have been really cranky if I enrolled in an arts degree majoring in history, and only got to do 4 history units, and that was my major. That's not the broad span of human history that I want to look at. That's 4 subjects. I think it's definitely about being able to articulate and communicate how history, for instance, teaches those skills, and sure, that might come with one mandatory course each semester, or a work integrated learning where you can kind of actually think, hey, look, history teaches me to do this, and here I am acting it out. But where it's just at the sacrifice your passion is heartbreaking.
Well, thanks everyone. I'm a little bit conscious of the time here, but I might just ask Mike if he can give us some closing remarks and summarize our excellent conversation. But thank you so much to all of our speakers for a great event.
Well, listen, I'm happy to cede. I think Amer was going to say something at the end, and I'm much more interested in what the panelists have to say.
Please.
And I feel like I've had my say already.
I was just going to agree with Molly and Hone that when I reference transferable skills, I'm not thinking of them as something separate that you've learned that tick the transferable box. It's the skills that we learn as we do something that we're passionate about. But yeah, I don't think of them as the way you were describing it, Mike, as this separate set. And I don't think that's what's being referred to in this research either. I think it's the whole skill set the person comes with is what's interesting. So it's the communication skills and the problem solving skills and the collaboration skills that the others just mentioned.
Yeah. No, I think, and again, I guess it is the danger of not being clear about the message and about the value of the degree. In that, I think the universities are now listening to employers who are saying we want students from with those transferable skills, but we're not having a nuanced enough discussion, as we are, I think, tonight, about how you acquire those transferable skills and the kind of the passion that you bring to the learning of the subject, but by implication, the transferable skills that you get in the process of doing that. And so for me, I guess the valuable takeaway that I'm getting from this discussion is that we do need to do a better job of really kind of thinking through and making clear both of the dimensions that I think all three of the speakers brought up, which is, to cultivate that love of learning for learning's sakes, and that passion for passion's sakes, and as Molly eloquently put it, for the sake of humanity, and our participation in a kind of a human, creative, innovative, and beautiful kind of society. And we need to kind of think about how that, I guess, how we map that on, or how we articulate, and I'm struggling here to articulate it, how we articulate that in the same breath as saying, but we're also getting these great transferable skills that will make you dollars, will get you employed. And I think it's a really difficult task to do. And of course, part of the value and the job of humanities students is to actually, make it more complicated. But then we're in this kind of catch-22 when we need to simplify, but our inclination is to make it complicated. But I particularly, look, I know we're running out of time. I'd like to thank all three speakers for contributing to a really interesting discussion. I'm really glad we recorded it as well. I think a lot of the discussion will be valuable to get out and to circulate a bit more widely, but we can